Welcome to the SoulFull Session live today. Oh, Greta. Hi, Greta. It was me. Ha ha ha. Oh, I love that. Greta's an excited new member of the SoulFull Collective for the SoulFull Way. So we're so excited to have you here today, Greta. It's been such an amazing few months as we've been building this idea of where values meets life. Hi, Jennifer and Todd. Rebecca's on here. Great to see you. So my name's Jennifer Maki. Oh, there's my husband. He's disappearing for a moment. He's buffering the room. We're in different levels in our home. So I'm Jennifer Maki, and this is.
I'm Todd Maki. Hi.
Hi to everyone. Welcome to the SoulFull Sessions Live. Today and this month of May is about creativity. Last month was about presence, and we've had the most extraordinary time these last few months where we are living our values each and every month with touch points, focusing on what truly matters to us, and then being able to have some fun together to be able to live those values and encourage them. So if you're new to the SoulFull Way, we actually set a theme for every single month that's based on a core value, and then we play with that throughout the whole month. We have live sessions to the first two Sundays of the month. The third Sunday, we actually interview someone that's living that value in their lives, and then the last Saturday of every month, we actually shift up the timing a bit to be from 10 to 12 Pacific time. And we come together in a live Zoom session and we play with whatever value we're dealing with. So last month was presence. We had an incredible time at the Soul of Presence workshop, pulling everyone together, meditating, doing some Qigong. And it was just amazing how we saw where presence actually showed up more and more in our lives, because when we focus on it, then we see it more and we tend to create it more. So this month is about creativity. And we're going to start off by just doing a little, like we do every week. We start off with a little centering exercise to just let the busy morning or the busy day go, depending on where you're chiming in from, to just come together and center for a moment on this focus of this theme. So I'll just ask you to set everything aside and just settle into some calm and settle into the moment, lingering with our theme of last month of presence, coming into the present moment. So just taking some beautiful deep breaths out through your mouth and just letting all of the activity of this morning go and coming to a place of calm centered in this moment. And just noticing your breath as it comes and goes, rooted into the ground, feeling connected to the energy within and all around you. And then I just want you to bring that word, creativity, into your attention, into your mind. And think about what creativity means to you. Just what creativity means to you, what bubbles to the surface of your attention. And then when you're ready, come back and just open your eyes. Always feels good to just let everything go and come back to a place of center. Bless you, Todd. I was a little delayed on the bless you. So, for those of you that kind of did that meditation along with us, I love it. We really had an amazing time these last few weeks with people engaging in the chat. So, even if it's one word or one thought or whatever topic we're discussing at that time, we're going to prompt with some questions throughout our time together. And just even if it's one word or one thought, I really appreciate that, because for Todd and I, we love to have live workshops and talks. And so it really means a lot to us when we're engaged, because we're really thinking about it. We feel like we're in the same room together. So if you want to just pop in, what came to mind when you were kind of in that space of just opening up to that idea of creativity, whether that's paint or art or whatever it was for you, just pop those into the chat as Todd and I share what came up for us. And then we'll talk about what you guys thought as well too. So Todd, what comes to mind? You and I have talked, we've talked lots behind the scenes, but what comes to mind when you think of creativity with this new topic for this month?
There's so much to it. I mean, I think it's a critical part for anybody. I think if you're sustaining life and just going through the motions every day, and you're not trying to do anything outside the box creatively, even just like talking to people, in an interesting way, then it makes it a more difficult journey.
Yeah. And for you, does it like, is it music for you? What is it for you that just pops to mind?
Yeah, the two, well, there's a bunch of them, but music certainly is one, listening and
Yeah.
playing, and the other one is sports. So playing hockey, for example.
Awesome. Absolutely. And for me, you and I have talked about this behind the scenes, but for years, I was able to kind of play out the creativity piece with our kids when we were homeschooling. And we're going to talk about that today about creativity and education. But I was able to be a kid again when I was homeschooling the kids. So for me, the moment that creativity comes up, I think of projects I don't normally do, although I live quite a creative life because I write every day for clients and for myself and for us. But I'm thinking about that. That's something that I do normally. But as soon as I think creativity, I create little juju stones and heart rocks. And I think about painting or doing some coloring or coloring in my journal. And so it's funny how when you say the word creativity, it brings to mind in consciousness all the ways in which we're creative because it's so much more than just what we typically think of as kind of art or music. It's so much more than that. We're going to talk lots about that today. So I'm just going to go to the chat. Thank you so much. Everybody's kind of just popped right in there. So Rebecca, dance. I love that I've had a little glimpse. Rebecca's in London. She's a really dear friend who we've met through Substack. And Rebecca, I feel very grateful to have seen a bit of her hip hop dancing when she goes to dance class. So I love that. Monica, welcome, honey. I'm so glad you're here today. Colors. Oh, I want to dive way more into that. Okay, colors. So we're going to have opportunities to chat back and forth as the month goes on. Oh, welcome, bathrobe guy. Love that you're here, Robes. Hello, everyone. Peace and loving kindness. That's the best creative way that we can be in the world. I love that. That's beautiful. Greta, I think of when I was a child and so happy playing with my farm toys. Oh, there's definitely connection there. I grew up on a farm too, Greta. So that's very cool. So today, as you know, if you've been a part of the Soulful Way at all, we tend to do it from a few different lenses or perspectives on whatever the value is. And so today we're taking a look at where creativity comes from. And so, historically, where does creativity come from? What are the phases that it's gone through? And what does that say about creativity and humanity? And so today we're actually going all the way back to what some people have called the Dark Ages. And we're talking about what happened during that dark age period and what does that say about creativity. And so the Dark Ages was this time. Maybe Todd, you want to talk because you're a history guy. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about what the Dark Ages were and what that meant for creativity, or how it kind of contracted creativity at that time and why. Go
Yeah,
for it.
I think a couple of things happened back then. It was a literally dark time for humanity.
Mm,
Think of Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and basically there was a castle with a bunch of castle people and then a bunch of serfs, and there really wasn't very much else. So there
yeah.
wasn't a lot of time or opportunity to be creative in that
And that
vein.
one.
I think a lot of the creativity that happened back in those days were within monasteries. And if you look at something like the Book of Kells, which would be an artistic output of, it's an Irish Bible that was from the
Yeah.
1400s. It was hand painted, and I've actually seen it in Dublin, but it's beautiful. It's like vivid colors, and so that was the arts that was available to you. But if
Yeah.
you were a serf, you know, working the fields, you probably didn't have a lot of time to be doing that kind of art.
Yeah. And yeah, so it's not that creativity went away. And the reason why we're talking about way back when is because it says something about our own lives now and how creativity shows up or doesn't show up for us at any given time. So during that dark age period of time, which is about 475, 76 AD to 1300 AD. So during that period, there was the collapse of the Roman Empire, right? So there was the political instability, the plague, warfare, rigid hierarchies, as you were saying, the castles and the serfs, and that's kind of it. There wasn't a lot of flow. There was reduced literacy and fragmented communities, and there was preservation, which is really self preservation and survival over innovation and that thriving element, which is kind of that recipe for creativity. So, whenever we feel restricted, it doesn't mean that creativity disappears, but it goes dormant when we're focused on just surviving. And we can experience that in our own lives. We're going to talk more about that today. So, in that time period, it became quieter, but it was happening. It was happening, as you said, Todd, monasteries preserving texts, right? And sacred music. So, how they were telling stories. So, that's how it was playing out. But it was almost like you were trying to preserve. And why was that, Todd? Because you and I were talking about the fact that there wasn't really a way to share. So, why was that? Yeah, talk about that a little bit.
So a lot of what changed after the Dark Ages was that we were able to actually, well, we weren't able to. It became easier to write things down. So there wasn't a
Yeah.
lot that was recorded outside of the monasteries and
Yeah.
some of the castles. People didn't write things down. They didn't
Yeah.
write very much. We did have Chaucer. There was literature going on, but it was very limited, and it wasn't able to be disseminated to the masses because
Yeah.
there was no printing press.
Yeah. And it was happening through architecture, right? And craftsmanship. So we don't always think about creativity from that perspective, but that's very much a part of it, right? That human element to want to share or to show up creatively. So folk traditions, it was happening in private. So in the quiet religious context, as opposed to being broader. But as is true with us as individuals, when something lies dormant, then it tends to kind of build and build and build. And I actually was having a great conversation with someone this last week that's very busy kind of wrapping up their work year. And they were saying, I crave the writing and I want to show up creatively, but right now I'm so busy in my life. And that's what happens. We contract, but then that builds. And we are creative beings by nature. We want to show up and show off what our talents are in whatever capacity that is. So, this idea that it was lying dormant, and then it kind of moved into that season of what we call the Renaissance period. So, then it was building and building and building. And then what happens during the Renaissance, Todd? Maybe talk a little bit about that.
So the Renaissance is the literal translation is rebirth, as most of you probably
Yeah.
know. And so it was rebirth of many things. And part of what happened, remember we talked about the Knights of the Round Table, and we talked about the serfs around the 1400s. In Italy, Italy wasn't actually a country; it was a bunch of city states. And in Florence, one of the families that was there, the Medici family, was a banking family. So they weren't the only one, but they were one of the first ones to actually take their money and reinvest it. And part of what happened was the rise, the middle class began to exist because basically you had a banking system. Now you could take money, put it in the bank, you can move it around. It was very unsophisticated, but it was a system. And so the Medicis, as they acquired wealth, they realized that they wanted to share that wealth. So Cosmo Medici, first of all, and then his humble son, whose name was Lorenzo the Magnificent, um, began investing in and supporting people like Da
Yeah.
Vinci and Botticelli, and
Mhm.
so they put money into the arts, and then it became the thing in vogue in that on all those city states in where Italy is now, and they started supporting artists, and it became a really great time to be a writer. You could make a living as a poet. I mean, I don't think there's many people making a living as a poet right now, but back then you could. So you could be a painter, you could be an
Okay.
inventor, you could do anything. So they were looking to support people because it made them look better.
So I got to contradict you there a little bit because there are lots of poets now that make money,
Yeah.
and luckily so. There's publishing companies like ours,
Yes.
but I also think too a lot of those people it was just this they had to express themselves. So we're looking at that period of 1300 to 1600, and there was that burst. It was kind of like after the plague at the beginning of the 1900s, and then 1920 came, and we had the birth of the flapper, right? So everybody kind of goes crazy. So when it goes to this dormant place, then it's building because we have this desire within ourselves to be able to create and to put ourselves out there creatively. And then it bursts out. And so the other thing that was really phenomenal, so curiosity expanded, right? So curiosity expanded, knowledge started to spread. Literacy actually increased during that time, right? So people started to read and write and have that craving to do that because they were shifting beyond surviving to wanting to thrive. What can I do next? The trade connected cultures, so that started to shift. Humanism emerged. artists were supported, as you were saying, through the Medici family, and science and art became connected. And so, one of the major things that happened that you and I have been talking about was the invention of the printing press in 1440 by Johannes Gutenberg. So, maybe talk a little bit about that, about how that shifted.
So that became a transitional point. So if you remember,
Yeah.
if you've gone to a traditional Catholic church, you'll notice that a lot of the church service is ritualized. It's about we do this in this particular order, and then we're going to talk to you in Latin for a while. So the reason the
Yeah.
priest talked in Latin is because there was an old saying, and it was actually a dig. If in the Renaissance time, if you're not very smart, they would say you had little Latin and less Greek. So it means you didn't understand the languages. The church basically ran that way. So they would come in and they would preach in Latin, so nobody understood what was going on. So the masses weren't really being educated. When Gutenberg came along, all of a sudden you could print something that was
Yeah.
in English, and you could teach people how to read, and then you could communicate information. And the churches, as you can imagine, weren't very happy about this. But
Yeah.
it was sort of an inevitable thing. It was like the internet at the time. It just
Yeah.
basically the world.
Absolutely. And that actually sparked the whole humanism of all of that. So we started to consider, what are humans capable of? Not just serving, the rich, but what is every human being capable of? So that started to shift. What can we discover? What can we create? What does it mean to live life fully? And thank goodness that time happened, because it was such a shift in how we started to show up at all different levels of society. And so just I find that so fascinating to look at the history. And each month, when we pick our theme of the month, we dive into the history of this and we take a look at what it meant, because things can become kind of commonplace because we think about, oh, it's creativity. Oh, and creativity is so natural now, particularly with the explosion of the internet and being able to share in so many different ways to get our music out there. We're not dependent on music producers. We can get our poetry out there. We don't have to go through a traditional publisher to get our words weaved into the world. So there's so much of that explosion, but we can kind of forget where we've come from. The other thing that happened was arts and science started to connect. So when we look at Leonardo da Vinci, right, artists became inventors. So it went from just being able to create beautiful art to now inventing and drawing the plans for what was to come. And so curiosity really sparked in our world. So how did music change during the Renaissance, Todd? So then it went from bards that were going from place to place, sharing their music. How did that explode? Because that's really your background. You're a bass player, you played in bands. How did that really change during the Renaissance period?
Well, if you, I hadn't thought about that question, but I'm off the top of my
Yeah.
head thinking that probably the biggest impact was that you could actually print sheet music and send it and
Right.
distribute it. So I've heard
Right.
once that Bach, when they wrote music, they didn't write it like they would write it down, the basic notes, but they didn't put all the nuances into it. So he actually tried not to share his full experience with other people doing his music. But what it did was open up the fact that other people could share the music, and you could play Bach, and not just where he was, you could play it somewhere else. And so music became more of a universally accessible. So the ability to access music and to play other people's music was probably
Yeah.
enhanced.
It's a really good point. Really good point. And isn't it amazing? Like, for those of you that have been to Europe or you live there, and Rebecca said, thank you, Todd. Thank you, Jennifer, for the educational history. I just find this part fascinating because it gives us a foundation of understanding as we then, move through the weeks ahead into our personal creativity. But if you've been in Europe or you live in Europe, I find it amazing as a Canadian, to stand in the Sistine Chapel. And, to know that Michelangelo had the scaffolding to the ceiling and for 3 years was painting this far from his face, and then to pull back and see the magnificence of that. Like, something different was happening, obviously, in that oppression of that creative realm and then the explosion. When you look at the statue of David, and there's beautiful artists today, but the meticulous nature, the time that people took, right, to even create a church over 3 generations, for St. Mark's Basilica in Venice. So you look at the time that was spent, it's just fascinating. And we're creating faster now, but there's not necessarily a meticulousness. And I wonder, and I don't have the answer to this, but I wonder if it was because people were so oppressed for so long and feeling such an anxiety around that and not feeling celebrated and not feeling supported in that. They were just creating in their little pockets. That when it finally exploded, people were just so thrilled to be able to be in that environment, to be able to create. So I want, for those of you watching, thank you for the little hearts. I see those. For those of you watching, or even the recording, to jot it down if you're, if you're watching this later, if you can think about or put into the chat a time when you felt like you were constricted in your creativity. When does that happen for you? As we talk, in this next little bit, Todd and I will talk about what it means and what's the environment for creativity to come alive. Has there ever been a time in your life where you felt like you just couldn't create? Has there been that? And you don't need to get into big details, in the chat, but just has there been a time, whether you're busy or whether you feel like you've just not been able to focus on that, or you've been a young mother, or whatever that is, when you felt like your creativity was lying dormant. And so now we're going to talk. So Todd, what do you think the environment is to help creativity come alive? Like, what's kind of the formula for that?
Well, interesting. We talked about presence last week. I think that's
Yeah.
a starting point. You're not going to write a beautiful poem if you're angry about somebody just cut you off on traffic. So I think that's a seminal beginning
Although
point.
sometimes that is fuel for some poets, right?
Well, what's the Clash apparently, but yeah, I think that's the starting point for it all, and then just being able to make time for yourself. And I think that there's times when you're not in the right headspace to begin anything. And I think for me there was a time way before I met Jennifer, where I lived in, I won't say the city, Mississauga, but I used to call it Pleasantville because it was like a bad movie. It was like everything was the same. The snow, you'd have snow, and all the guys would go out and shovel their driveways, and then they'd stand, and all the wives would bring out their coffee with Bailey's in it or whatever. But it wasn't a
Yeah.
positive growing experience. It was Pleasantville. It was nice, but it wasn't anything interesting. And I found for myself, I kind of, for that time that I was there, I just wasn't present with many things that were creative. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And so where do you want to talk about where you were working at that time? Because it's the juxtaposition.
oh yeah, I at that time I was working with the Walt Disney Company in.
Which is amazing. Like when you were sharing that, like you were working at Disney at that time, the impression being that that's one of the most creative places on earth to work. And yet,
Yeah, I lived vicariously. There was an art department, and actually it was the time when Toy Story came out. There's a
yeah,
long story about Toy Story that is too long for here, but the crux of it was that they developed the toys for the world in Canada in our office. And so there was this really talented, it was a team effort, but there was a talented sculptor called Alvaro Cervantes. And Alvaro, I would go walk down the hall. I was in the music division. I walked down the hall, and there's Alvaro, and he's sculpting. And he was sculpting actually the first Buzz Lightyear. So the actual image of the toy,
yeah,
Alvaro actually did they called them maquettes. There weren't any available because Pixar had done it differently. But the first maquettes were done by Alvaro and the team there.
wow,
And so I actually saw the development. And then I'd walk down the hall, and the guy that was the toy guy, a guy called Mark Northwood, he would bend my ear for 15 minutes on the articulation of the joint in the Buzz Lightyear. Like it has to go this way, otherwise it's not real. It's not the Buzz wouldn't work that way. These guys were so intense on it. It was such a creative process to watch. But anyway, yeah. So that's the juxtaposition of that time in my life.
yeah. And doesn't that say a lot? I mean, I always find, the depth of the metaphor. So this scenario represents our humanity. We can be surrounded by creativity, but if we don't feel that within ourselves, if we are not aligned with that presence, with that feeling of rest or freedom, then so we can be surrounded by creativity, but we can't actually express it for ourselves,
Yeah.
which is so true. And for me, when I've worked in, intense, I've always been creative in some sense. And you were too, working for the music and division of it Disney. It didn't mean that you weren't. And isn't it funny? There's different layers of creativity. Because even though you were being creative in how you were maybe approaching or doing the sales for Disney Music, and I was creative when I was working, in public relations, but it wasn't personal creativity. So maybe there's those layers too. We can be showing up in our jobs being as creative as we can be, but that's maybe not our definition of the freedom of creativity to express ourselves and that environment. And so we need that, right? We need to feel safe. You need to know that curiosity is welcome. And I think there are some people like those guys that were working in the toy department that it wouldn't have mattered what, because they were in that environment to create, it didn't matter what was going on around them. They were obsessed with that creativity to be able to make it right. But on the outside, and we've talked about this in our other talks, even though, Disney is considered the happiest place on earth, what was the tagline for inside the company?
Oh, 20% annual growth.
Or you're fired,
Yeah.
right? Like if you're not 20% annual growth, or you're not going to be moving with what is expected of you in the work environment. So even that is an oppression to our creativity. And yet those guys, in some capacity, some way, they made it work no matter what the pressure was. They had to find a way to get beyond what that pressure was and just do what they love to do. And I think that all of us, if we really want to embrace and immerse ourselves in this idea of creativity, we need to get there too. So I'm going to go in and just see what people wrote. So let me just see. So Greta said, when I worked for the government, it really wore me out. I can understand that. I don't know what capacity you work for the government, Greta, but that bureaucracy, right? I worked in an agency, and ironically I worked in a PR creative agency, and while everyone around me was really creative, I felt so exhausted all the time. I could only create for my job. I had nothing left for me. So I wasn't writing for me. I was writing for everybody else, which is a very different world. And even in our publishing company, Mad Hero Productions, when we work with writers, we talk about the soulful process of writing. I can pump out, I ran a department for healthcare and technology. So I could pump out the writing for that into the PR world for the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, LA Today, whatever that was. But the soulful process of creativity and writing my own book was incredibly different. So there's layers and different definitions for what this creative process is. So I can understand that, Greta. Monica, when I was traveling several times a week for work, it was hard to be creative and carve out time. Absolutely. And you were an analyst, Greta, for the government. So, yeah, absolutely, Monica. Thanks for sharing that. It isn't when you're traveling, when you're burned out, when you're constantly having to show up. When I worked at the agency, I was like 6 o'clock in the morning into the office, 10 o'clock at night out, heading home. So, I love to watch in Substack too the evolution in Substack of a creative environment for people. So even the algorithms work differently in Substack. The algorithms on social media platforms is about volume. How many posts can you make? How many reels? How much can you push yourself? Even utilizing AI, whatever it takes, doesn't matter if it's you as a human, just pumping it out, pumping it out. And Substack, the algorithm works on relationships, which when you look at the guts of Substack, the algorithm is based on relationship, how much you engage, how much you converse, how much you're sharing. It's actually not about how many times you post a day. And I know there's lots of Substack experts out there that teach you how to make money, but isn't that a beautiful thing? That's why Substack is so different than any other platform that I've ever experienced. I tried to treat other social media platforms, working in PR and communications, obviously. I'm immersed in all the evolution of that through the course of my career and owning my own business for 20 years. But it's amazing when I tried to treat Facebook's, Instagram, LinkedIn like that, about a relationship environment, but I couldn't play the game of pumping it out 24/7. So you can never hit those really, really high numbers. And plus, it's not about that. It's about quality versus quantity, particularly when we're being creative. We want to share with people that share our passions and our knowledge, and we want to root in these values. Okay, so really cool. Anything else you want to add on that, honey, on, just the idea of either the dark ages or renaissance or the shift? Anything else you want to add?
No, that kind of covers it, I think. And then it moves on, and we're seeing another bit of a renaissance now, I think, because um, when I was in the music
Yeah.
industry, when digital downloading became a thing, and I
Yeah.
was actually in a meeting in Toronto, and I was with the Canadian Record Industry Association, so all the record label heads,
Yeah.
and they brought in what they said was the guy said it's not the first MP3 player in Canada, but it's probably the second. And they played it for
Yeah.
everybody, and everybody listened to it. And nobody said a word about it, and they just totally ignored it. So there was a shift then, and it was a democratization of the music industry. So you didn't have to have a three record label deal get distribution, all of a sudden, a few years later, you could basically go in your basement with really cheap tools, record an album, and put it out there. And so
Absolutely.
we're seeing a real spike in creativity and a bit of a, we're not at this point anymore being dictated to by the record labels in terms of what we listen to, because it used to be they would put the song on the radio, they would promote what they wanted people to hear, and that style of music became
Absolutely.
big. So now there isn't that driving it. It's the YouTube, and it's all everybody doing what they want. So you can find anything out there in the music industry, and it doesn't cost you anything to actually put out an album.
Absolutely. And it's the same in the publishing industry as well too. Because it used to be that, when I was writing, and write for all these top publications, but I was often a ghostwriter, I was writing for a client or whatever that was. And then I didn't have the time to build my manuscript and then pitch, because I wasn't a full-time writer for that element of things. And so I didn't have the ability to be able to do those pitch letters and wait for all that to come, because I was focused my career somewhere else. Now, I mean, it wasn't all that difficult to publish a book. It takes time and energy, certainly from the creative side of things. And then now that's why we started our publishing company, because it really is not about you necessarily being this polished writer. Everyone has a story to tell. And whether that story is just for your family, it's just for your children, it's just for your business, whatever that is, we all have these stories to tell. And now, you and I are finding, we just published two books this week, The Awaken Feminine, The Awaken Masculine, with our beautiful client, Melanie Van Hock, and 14 authors. And it was so incredible. And a lot of these writers were first time writers. So they were just sharing the story from their soul. And actually, even when I'm doing a project with, one of the colleges that I work with, people that are coming from another country, they can share their stories of transformation. We're so much more able to share the creativity that we have, and we watch it on Substack all the time, from writers and musicians. Everyone's on there. If they just paint, they share their paintings. If they're crafting, if they're, do whatever their joy is, they're able to share it, and people are absorbing it and loving it and commenting. And it doesn't have to be this quick hit. It can be a deep conversation. So it's really shifting and changing. So I want to switch gears a little bit, because we're cognizant of time on your beautiful Sunday. Sir Ken Robinson. Have you seen his TED Talk, those that are watching? So if you have, just give a little heart. If you've heard Sir Ken Robinson, it's the number one most watched TED Talk in history. So I wonder if anyone's heard or seen him. And I don't see any hearts coming up. So it may be that folks haven't seen this. So I'm going to put the link in this week's newsletter of the SoulFull Way, so you can watch the whole YouTube video. But he is a really fascinating educator, and he is funny as heck. So his talk is about 20 minutes long, and it's actually called Do Schools Kill Creativity? By Sir Ken Robinson. So he's an educator, and he talks about, and I watched this, I think it's about 20 years old, that TED Talk, one of the most influential firsts. And he talks about creativity as being something that we are not aligning our education with. That really, education, as I'm sure many of you know, was designed for the Industrial Revolution, right? During that time, to get people to, the job. But so in hierarchy of getting a job, it would be mathematics and languages, and then humanities, and then the creative arts, right? And dance being one of the last. And so, Todd, do you want to talk about your impression of Sir Ken Robinson, that talk? Anything you want to add or stories you want to tell from that? I want to give you a chance to chat and share your
Yeah,
impressions of that.
it is. I used to show that. I used to teach marketing at the School of Business at Confederation College, and I would show it to every first year marketing student just to talk about creativity and what it was,
Yeah,
and it talks specifically about what kids know and what how creative they are. And he tells a story of a 6 year old girl in a class, and she's sitting there, and the teacher knew that she was very withdrawn, didn't really participate, didn't do anything in the classroom. And then they did a drawing experience, and she was drawing like crazy. And the teacher came over and said, what do you do? What are you drawing?" She said, "Well, I'm drawing God." And the teacher said, "Well, we don't really know what God looks like." She said, "Well, they will in a minute." And so it's about
yeah,
the children not being um, stuck in a thought process where they can't create things. And they, if you see a
absolutely.
child playing, you see, I love the videos on the internet of little kids just dancing around their parents. They have a whole different world going on. And I think that
Absolutely.
what part of his thing is that we take the creativity out of children. because of
Absolutely.
the way we teach them. So
And Picasso said every child is an artist. And it's not about cultivating creativity, it's about maintaining creativity through our lives. So give that a thought for a moment, right? Obviously, Picasso did not draw a tree the way everybody else drew. And, he busted out of that box, and we use him as an example, but many people do that. And the other really cool story. So this kind of feeds into why I chose to what we called life school our kids. Decided I would life school before I saw that Sir Ken Robinson. But as soon as I saw that video, I thought, this is why we're actually doing it. This actually explains why we're going to homeschool our kids, or life. We called it life school because it happened in life and everywhere, not just at home. But he talked about a really important piece where there was a little girl, actually, her name was Gillian Lynn. So I don't know if you've heard of Cats or you've ever seen Phantom of the Opera, but as a little girl, she was asked about this story about how she got into choreography. And so she was said when she was a little girl, they thought she had a learning disability. And in the 1930s, that was, they said, your child is kind of stunted in their growth and their in their intelligence. And so Jillian's mom took her to a specialist, and they were in the room and they were asking questions, the mom and the daughter, Jillian, and the doctor. And then at one point, the doctor just got up and said to the mom, "Would you come with me for a moment? Could I talk to you quietly?" And she said, "Sure." And as he was leaving the room, he put on the radio. And then they walked into a room outside of there and two-way glass and invited the mother in. And as soon as they walked around the corner and looked through the glass, the little girl was dancing and moving and chatting to herself and very animated. And the doctor looked at the mother and said, "There's no learning disability that your child has. She has no problem. She's a dancer." And so he said, "Put her into a dance school and see what happens." And so obviously she was part of the Royal Ballet for a while. And then she became, one of the choreographers for Cats and Phantom of the Opera. And we have to bring out and notice and be a part and be attuned to the creativity of children. And so when I even speak to our own boys, they learned in very different ways. We called Liam, our oldest son, Winnie the Pooh, and he would sit for hours in his thoughtful spot and he would read even before he could read words. He would read and focus in on these little books. And then Nathaniel, we called him Tigger because you just put out two fingers and he would bouncy, bouncy, bounce everywhere he went. Liam would sit for hours and learn. Nathaniel would do round offs the entire time I was teaching. And even though there was a year and a half apart from them, when I would ask the boys questions to see if they were understanding the information, Nathaniel, a lot of the times, would be able to answer even more of the answers. And I would have to say to him, "Could you just be quiet for a moment, honey, and allow your brother to answer?" So he looked as though he was not paying attention at all, but that's how he learned. If you made him sit down in a chair, he would be tapping, his fingers, and all he could think was, "I need to move, I need to move." So we have to consider how our children learn in the different ways in which they learn. We have to consider how we learn, and we have to honor that. And ironically enough, that little boy who, wasn't diagnosed with anything, I'm sure he would have been if he was at school, wasn't diagnosed with anything, and he just got a scholarship at University of Victoria. To be part of a 25-person team in his first year of university, right out of the gate, to be able to study psychology and science. And so because we were in a position to do it and because we had the joy to do it, because not everybody can homeschool or has the means to do it, I feel very grateful that we did. We were able to tap into our kids' creativity. And so we want to take a full step back and look at that child within ourselves in this next month. And we want to consider where our creativity lives, what that looks like, what has been kind of put to the side that we either through busyness or environment or pressure that we put to the side. And if you're here, you're probably interested in dabbling and expanding, finding ways to find presence and peace and meditation and finding balance in your life so that you can live more of these values consciously and consistently in your life. And so the touch points this whole next month is going to be a newsletter every week that gives you ideas and thoughts and, and links to things. we're going to be having next week is Mother's Day. So we'll be taking the weekend off because we'll be having presence and creativity as a family. And I hope those of you that are mothers, either to fur babies or even to yourself or to creative ideas, that you take next weekend to live that creativity. And then the next Sunday, we'll be having a Sunday Soulful Session. And the Sunday after that, we'll be interviewing someone that's living creativity in the world. And then we'll have our workshop at the end of the month. So we want to leave you today with some ideas that might spark some creativity for you. So some of these I've been using through life school. Some things I use myself. So Todd, do you have ideas of how you're going to spark? We've talked about this. And if you guys have been thinking in the audience, if you've been thinking about how you're going to be creative this week, I know a couple of you were posting actually on Community is Key. I see Monica said, amazing. Congratulations to Nathaniel from Rebecca. Both your sons, Liam and Nathaniel, are inspirational parents. Thank you, Rebecca. So I'd love you to be able to share what sparked for you. As soon as you saw this topic, what's a little something, something you're going to do that's different than you normally do in relation to creativity this month? And then Todd, do you want to talk about how what's sparking for you?
Yeah, I think the thing that's sparking for me is that I'm going to spend some time with music this month. So I'm going to bring my bass down to the living room, and I'm going to set it up. So I set it up so that I can put my phone into it, put my headset on, and play and not bother anybody. So I just want to get into a habit of playing every day again. It's been a long time, and it takes about about a week of playing consistently to remember where my fingers go. But then after that, the guitar stops playing you, and you start playing the guitar. So it's just a matter of getting into that mindset and moving
Absolutely.
and getting back into that to that groove, literal groove.
Um, literally the groove.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Our boys are on board with this too. We've talked to them about how they're going to be creative. Liam Nathaniel's actually off at leadership camp. We just dropped him off this morning. Liam is off working in a strip mine in northern British Columbia. We just dropped him off as well today too. So he's in full working mode. Probably won't will be focused on the driving aspect of the mine. And then when he gets home, we've talked about this creativity, playing more music, connecting it together as a family. We tend to do things like we elongate our dining room table and we'll put a puzzle at the end. When the kids were small, I used to shift up what was on the table every few days. So I would put things out to spark that energetic flow or that creative flow. So I'd put markers into a little container. I would put a little, we have like a mandala coloring book. I would put out activity books like a Sudoku just to spark your joy and your peace. This week, I'm going to be putting out my little heart stones, and I actually do what's called juju stones. They're soulful stones. So I collect heart rocks from all around the world, and then I wrap coil wire around them, and I'll bring one to show you next Sunday for sure. But I'm just putting out things in our home, and I'm thinking about things in a different way. So I encourage you. So here's just some ideas for you, and then I'm giving time for people to kind of write there, and then we're going to go through yours. So as many as on here, please put one little thought in there. So things like, not always would we think about this, but how we shift up our regular routines to make room for creativity. So, taking a different walking route. So, if you walk a certain way, find a new place to walk. Find a new way to walk it. So, write one paragraph if you're a writer, one paragraph without purpose that has nothing, that you're not going to post on Substack, that you're not going to post anywhere. Write a poem that you're not going to show anyone else. Do a little creative writing. Ask a question you normally wouldn't, or a deep dive question into direction for your life, or just write about the leaf that's tossing on the tree as you're watching the buds bloom and everything come into spring, whatever that is for you. And some of you might be in winter because you're heading, in Australia, you're heading into winter. Photograph beauty. Just photograph light for the week or movement of water. So try to think outside the box of what you would normally photograph or write about or do. Cook intuitively. Don't use a recipe. Do something that's totally that you have always wanted to make, a dessert or a beautiful entree that you have always wanted to make, and just do it from your soul and just flow. Rearrange a room. Todd and I are going to be doing that this week. The boys have left. They have dumped all their stuff. We will be rearranging, we will be cleaning, and we will putting in our garden in the next couple of weeks. So that creativity, revisit something that you loved as a child. create a playlist for your current season. So Todd and I have what we call the Golden Hills playlist. We wrote about it in Just One Soulful Thing, where we created a playlist of inspirational songs that we'll put on and sing together and just have fun doing. And then journal like with colored pens. So whatever this is, find a new way to do it. Try a creative medium that you've never experienced. Build something, sing, plant something, write a letter, create something imperfect. Don't worry about how it's going to show up. Dance while making dinner. Keep a notebook of your ideas. Ask what might delight me today. So hopefully that gives you some thoughts and ideas. And then I'm going to go through. And I think Monica said, oops, I lost my little. Okay, Monica said, I'm a quilter. My other creative space, working on a special baby quilt for a friend. That's amazing. That's very cool. And then Greta said photography. Oh, that's amazing. So I'm going to bring something next week that I'm going to have done, even if I've just started it, to kind of inspire us. So, those of you that are watching, whether you're live or whether you're watching the recording, bring something next week to our soulful session to talk about. And then, as we gather at the end of the month, the last Saturday of the month, I'm really hoping everyone's coming to the workshop. If it's your first time, it's totally free. We've got a lot of members on here. So, feel free to come to that soul. It's called the Soul of Creativity, and come and bring the thing you created this month. I just love it. This is about creating community and connection and inspiring one another as we live these little values month to month. So, anything else you want to add, Todd, to
No,
wrap up our
it's going to be an
session?
exciting month. I think this is a really fun one to work on.
We've had a lot of people reaching out to us just saying, okay, it just gives another little thought to how I'm going to create creativity in my life. Thank you for joining us today, everyone. I hope it's sunny where you are or you're doing something creative and beautiful today. Thank you for spending your time with us. It means a lot. And I'm hoping that you just picked up a little spark from today. And I look forward to seeing you not next Sunday, but the Sunday after. For those of you that are moms to anything, happy Mother's Day. And we'll really look forward to seeing you weekend after next on Sunday. And then we'll be talking about personal creativity, how we're living that in our world, what we're showing up, and how we're living this personally in our lives. Thank you, Monica. I'm so thrilled you're here. It's been lovely getting to know you. Rebecca, so excited you're here, sweetheart. Thank you for showing up today. It's sunny. Thank you, guys. Lots of love, everybody. Have a wonderful week, have a couple weeks, and we'll see you in 2. Okay. Mwah. Happy creating.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.